that celebrations are magnificent, at the heart of the pageantry is a simple message: service.
A sealed envelope, delivered at 9:30 p.m. The king sits alone in his study, and inside, a report from his own son that will destroy his marriage overnight. What Prince William discovered about Queen Camilla is absolutely shocking, and it's all documented. This isn't gossip. This isn't speculation. This is about a secret investigation conducted by the future King of England against his own stepmother. And when you see what he uncovered, you'll understand why King Charles made the coldest decision of his life. Before we dive deep, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this story has layers that will blow your mind. Let's get into it. The mysterious delivery. Picture this. Buckingham Palace. Late evening. King Charles has dismissed all his staff. He's alone in his private study, probably reviewing state documents or catching up on correspondence. Then, around 9:30 p.m., one of his most trusted aides enters the room. In his hands, a manila envelope. But this isn't ordinary palace mail. This envelope bears Prince William's personal wax seal. The aide explains that the Prince of Wales sent specific instructions. Private delivery, king's eyes only. Then he leaves Charles alone with whatever's inside. Now think about this for a second. William doesn't send sealed confidential reports at night for minor issues. This is the heir to the throne, the future king, bypassing all normal channels of communication to ensure his father sees something privately. Charles sits there staring at this envelope. His mind must be racing. What could possibly be so urgent, so sensitive, that William felt compelled to deliver it this way? He breaks the seal and starts reading. The report is substantial, multiple pages, detailed, professional, and it concerns one person, Queen Camilla. But here's what makes this different from typical palace drama. William's introducts. Tian makes something crystal clear. He hasn't come to this decision lightly. He acknowledges the conflict between family loyalty and duty to the crown. And most importantly, he emphasizes that every single claim in this report can be verified through multiple independent sources. He's not asking his father to just believe him. He's saying, check this yourself. Investigate. You'll find I'm right. And that's exactly what Charles does. What the report revealed. So what was in this report? What did William discover that was serious enough to document in formal writing? It started 3 months earlier with something that seemed minor at the time. A senior household manager, someone with 20 years of impeccable service, suddenly requested a transfer. Not a promotion, not a lateral move. A transfer to a minor administrative position with significantly reduced responsibilities. This person had worked closely with both Charles and Camilla, managing daily schedules, coordinating palace operations. They were excellent at their job, so why would they voluntarily step down? William found this strange, so he made discreet inquiries. What he discovered was disturbing. Camilla had called this staff member into a private meeting, and during that meeting, she questioned their loyalty. Not directly, of course. The language was polite, diplomatic, but the message was clear. Certain staff members seemed more devoted to old ways than to embracing her vision for the palace. She implied that people who couldn't adapt to her leadership style might find themselves in trouble. The household manager left that meeting feeling distinctly threatened, and within days, they requested that transfer. Now, one incident? That could be a misunderstanding, right? Miscommunication happens. But William documented 2 additional cases that followed the exact same pattern within weeks. Both involved long-serving palace employees. Both had decades of experience and deep institutional knowledge about royal protocols. Both found themselves feeling undermined by Camilla and insecure about their positions. Both requested transfers to reduced roles. 3 separate incidents, 3 experienced professionals, all following an identical pattern. But here's where it gets really calculated. Camilla then filled those vacant positions with individuals from outside traditional palace recruitment channels. These new staff members lacked the extensive experience typically required for such sensitive positions, but they shared one characteristic: personal loyalty to Camilla rather than to the institution itself. Once these new people were in place, they began forming an inner circle around the queen consort. They handled her communications, they controlled access to her, and they operated in ways that bypassed established protocols entirely. William's report documented regular meetings Camilla held with this group in her private apartments. The timing was specific, scheduled during periods when Charles was occupied elsewhere with official duties. What were they discussing? Restructuring palace operations, reassigning responsibilities, and cultivating what they called a modernization effort led by Camilla. But modernization is just a nice word for what was really happening: a systematic power grab. The institution institutional takeover. The information flow within Buckingham Palace began to shift dramatically. Decisions that traditionally required consultation with senior advisors started happening through informal channels. Staff members who raised questions about proper procedures found themselves excluded from future discussions. A culture of uncertainty developed. People hesitated to follow established protocols if doing so might displease the Queen Consort. Think about what this means. The institutional knowledge that had guided palace operations for generations was being systematically dismissed as outdated thinking, and Camilla was making very specific statements about her role and authority. She told various staff members that her position as Queen Consort carried more weight than people recognized. She reminded people that she stood beside the king, and therefore her wishes deserved the same respect as direct orders from Charles himself. Now stop and think about that for a second. If you have to tell people that your wishes should be treated as direct orders from the king, you're already operating outside normal boundaries. That's not how institutional authority works. That's how personal power grabs work. Legitimate authority doesn't need to constantly assert itself. It's inherent in the position. But the manipulation went even deeper. William's report detailed financial irregularities. Budget allocations for Camilla's office had increased substantially without going through normal approval processes. Expenses appeared on palace accounts that didn't match established spending patterns. When financial administrators asked questions, Camilla's new staff provided vague answers about operational necessities and evolving requirements. The amounts weren't enormous enough to trigger major alarms, but the lack of transparency violated fundamental fiscal accountability standards. William also documented something particularly concerning. Trusted advisors were expressing growing worry about their diminishing access to Charles. Camilla had begun intercepting certain communications before they reached the king. She would review matters first, then decide what information Charles actually needed to see. She framed this as helpfully filtering unnecessary details, but the advisors recognized it for what it really was: control over information flow. She was stripping away important context and managing what the king knew about his own palace. And there was more. Camilla had been suggesting changes to planned royal events that would increase her prominence relative to other family members, alterations to seating arrangements, speaking orders, photo opportunities. When event coordinators pushed back citing traditional protocols, Camilla's staff applied pressure by invoking her authority as the king's wife. Each individual incident might seem minor when viewed separately. A staff transfer here, a budget question there, some suggestions about event planning. But the cumulative effect revealed something undeniable: a systematic effort to build personal power independent of proper institutional channels. Camilla was constructing a parallel structure of authority within the palace, one that answered to her alone rather than serving the crown as an institution. Charles verifies everything, so Charles finishes reading this report around midnight. He's sitting there in his study, and his entire understanding of his marriage has just been shattered. The woman he married, the woman he fought for decades to have accepted by the public and the institution, the woman he made Queen Consort despite enormous controversy. She now appeared in a light he had never imagined possible. But here's what separates this story from typical palace drama. Charles didn't react emotionally. He didn't confront Camilla immediately. Instead, the next morning, he did something methodical and revealing. He pulled out his personal diaries. Charles has kept detailed journals for years, recording not just official business, but his impressions of daily palace life, interactions with staff, observations about operations, and he started cross-referencing Eve, a wry single claim in William's report against his own records. The first incident about the household manager's transfer happened on a Tuesday in early September. Charles flipped to that week and found an entry noting that Camilla seemed preoccupied and less communicative than usual that evening. He kept going through the timeline. For each significant event in the report, he searched his diaries for corresponding entries, and he found numerous small notations that suddenly took on completely new meaning. Days when he had recorded feeling oddly out of touch with palace operations. Moments when staff members seemed hesitant to speak freely in his presence. Occasions when Camilla had steered conversations away from certain topics or people. At the time, these observations seemed too minor to warrant concern. Now they formed pieces of a larger puzzle. Charles recalled a specific morning in October when he had asked about the household manager's transfer. Camilla explained it as a personal choice choice by the staff member who wanted reduced responsibilities before retirement. Charles accepted that explanation without question, trusting his wife's account completely. He now realized he had never actually spoken directly with the household manager about the decision. Camilla had smoothly inserted herself as the sole source of information, and Charles had failed to verify the story independently. He examined his schedule from recent months with fresh perspective, and he noticed patterns in when Camilla had suggested he attend certain meetings or skip others. There were events she encouraged him to handle personally while volunteering to manage different matters herself. Charles had appreciated what seemed like helpful partnership in managing their workload. Only now could he see how these arrangements had systematically isolated him from specific areas of Palace Opera. The financial irregularities prompted Charles to request detailed budget reports. He spent an entire afternoon reviewing expense accounts and authorization records, and he discovered exactly what William had described. Increased spending from the Queen Consort's office had bypassed normal approval processes. When Charles looked for the documentation trail that should exist for such expenditures, he found only vague justifications submitted after the fact. The pattern of avoiding proper oversight troubled him deeply because it showed intentional circumvention, not accidental mistakes. He also reviewed communications from various palace departments, and he noticed that information reaching his desk over recent months had become noticeably more filtered and summarized. Complex issues arrived with simple recommendations attached, leaving little room for his own consideration. Camilla had often been the one delivering these condensed briefings, explaining she wanted to save him from unnecessary details. When you hear that, it sounds considerate on the surface. But when you realize it was part of a broader pattern of controlling what information reached the king, it becomes something entirely different. Every piece of evidence William had gathered checked out against independent verification. Charles could no longer pretend these were misunderstandings or minor missteps. And here's the most painful part. Charles had to acknowledge his own role in allowing this to develop. He had been so focused on his official duties, so eager to demonstrate trust in Camilla, that he had stopped applying normal oversight. He wanted their partnership to work smoothly, and he had confused blind trust with healthy confidence. That confusion created space for serious problems to grow unchecked. The freeze begins. The next morning, everything changed. Charles entered the breakfast room to find Camilla already seated with her tea and newspapers. He offered a brief nod instead of his customary kiss on her cheek. He took a seat at the opposite end of the table, rather than the adjacent chair he normally occupied. Camilla looked up with surprise, but Charles buried his attention in morning briefing papers. She attempted light conversation about the day's schedule and received only minimal responses that ended the discussion before it could develop. Charles finished his breakfast quickly and departed without the leisurely conversation that typically marked their morning routine. Camilla sat alone at the table, confused by the sudden change. She assumed Charles was simply preoccupied with some pressing state matter. She had no way of knowing this cold reception marked the beginning of a permanent shift in their relationship. Charles instructed his private secretary to arrange separate transportation for all upcoming royal engagements. He explained he needed flexibility in his schedule that joint travel wouldn't accommodate. Staff found the request unusual, but implemented the changes without question. Camilla discovered the new arrangement when informed her car would leave 15 minutes after the king's for an event they were both attending. The separation felt uncomfortable, but she still didn't understand what was happening. The king stopped attending regular evening briefings where he and Camilla had traditionally reviewed the next day's activities together. He began receiving these updates alone in his study, making decisions without seeking her input. Palace staff noticed immediately and adjusted their reporting procedures. Documents and requests that previously went to both the king and queen consort now moved only through Charles's office. Camilla found herself increasingly isolated from the flow of information that governed daily palace operations. Then came the physical separation. Charles arranged for his personal belongings to be moved from the private apartments he shared with Camilla. He established residence in a separate wing of the palace that had previously served as guest quarters. He framed the move as temporary, citing the need for quiet space to handle sensitive matters requiring his undivided attention. But the physical separation meant their paths crossed less frequently, and even chance encounters became awkward exchanges of polite formalities rather than genuine connection. Camilla attempted to arrange a private dinner where they could reconnect away from palace pressures. She sent several requests through proper channels suggesting various dates that might fit Charles's schedule. Each attempt received a polite response citing unavoidable conflicts or prior commitments. commitments. She began to understand her husband was actively avoiding time alone with her. Staff observed the new dynamic and adjusted accordingly. Servants and administrators who had previously sought approval from both the king and queen consort now directed all requests solely to Charles. The king made clear through his actions that Camilla's opinions on household matters no longer carried weight in his decision-making process. Charles excluded Camilla from planning sessions for upcoming royal tours. He had always involved her in these preparations, valuing her perspective on public engagement strategies. Now he conducted these discussions with William and other senior royals, while Camilla received only basic information about finalized plans. She found herself treated as a participant who would be informed what to do, rather than a partner who helped shape the approach. The charitable initiatives that Charles and Camilla had previously managed as joint projects were reorganized. The king removed her name from leadership positions on several foundation boards they had co-chaired. He reassigned her responsibilities to other family members without explanation or discussion. Camilla discovered these changes when revised organizational charts appeared in official Palace C. Communications. The public nature of her demotion added humiliation to the growing sense of isolation. The desperate attempts, Charles began communicating with Camilla exclusively through formal written channels. His personal secretary would deliver notes outlining necessary information about shared obligations or required coordination for public events. The messages were brief, factual, devoid of any personal warmth. The king treated his wife with the same professional distance he might show to a minor government official, rather than his life partner and closest companion. When Camilla couldn't take it any longer, she sent a heartfelt letter to Charles expressing confusion about the distance between them. She wrote that she sensed something had changed and asked for the opportunity to understand what had gone wrong. The king's response arrived 2 days later, a single typed paragraph stating he would communicate any necessary information through appropriate channels. The coldness of that reply left Camilla both hurt and frightened about what might come next. She attempted to reach out to William, thinking perhaps the Prince of Wales might help her understand what had changed with his father. She sent a request for a private meeting to discuss family matters. William's office responded after several days with a note explaining his schedule was extremely full with upcoming commitments. The polite refusal felt significant. William had always made time for family discussions before. Camilla began to suspect that whatever had poisoned her relationship with Charles might involve other family members as well. She noticed that invitations to certain palace functions no longer arrived at her office. Events where her presence had been assumed now proceeded without any expectation of her attendance. She discovered these exclusions when she happened to overhear staff discussing arrangements for gatherings she knew nothing about. The realization that she was being deliberately bypassed was deeply humiliating. She made one more attempt to bridge the gap with Charles by attending an event where she knew he would be present. She arrived early and positioned herself where he would have to acknowledge her when he entered. The king offered a minimal greeting before moving to the opposite side of the room. Throughout the evening, Charles managed to avoid any substantial interaction despite being in the same space for over 2 hours. The deliberate snub in front of other guests made clear that this situation had moved beyond private disagreement. Charles implemented new protocols throughout the palace. He issued directives establishing that all significant decisions required his personal review and written authorization. No department head could make changes to staffing, budgets, or procedures without submitting detailed proposals directly to the king's office. The new system created multiple layers of oversight that effectively eliminated opportunities for anyone to exercise independent authority. He formed an advisory council that included William prominently, along with several long-serving counselors whose experience and loyalty were unquestioned. The king scheduled regular meetings with this group to review all major palace operations and upcoming royal activities. Camilla received no invitation to join the council. Her name appeared nowhere on the official membership roster. The inner circle of staff members Camilla had recruited found themselves gradually moved to positions where they handled routine administrative tasks far from centers of influence. None were fired outright, but their responsibilities shrank until they effectively held make-work positions. Several chose to resign rather than accept the demotion. Others stayed, but understood clearly that their prospects for advancement had disappeared. The network Camilla had tried to build dissolved as people recognized that association with her carried no benefits and potential costs. Public appearances continued on schedule, with Charles and Camilla appearing together as required by their positions. The king maintained appropriate courtesy during these joint engagements, standing beside her for photographs and acknowledging her presence in public remarks. Their body language remained professional and correct, without suggesting either warmth or obvious conflict. The careful maintenance of appearances protected the monarchy's image, while allowing the internal reality to be completely different. What do you think about how this all went down? Was Charles right to completely freeze Camilla out, or should he have given her a chance to explain? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to stay updated on how this royal freeze continues to play out behind palace walls, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. We're tracking every development in this story. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.